Welcome to the Mushroom Hunting Workshop. We have a full house here tonight at Opportunity Resources. Thank you for joining us on Facebook Live because as you can see, we are at room capacity. For the last half hour, everyone's been enjoying some delicious mushroom appetizers and beverages. And Tim Wheeler will be joining us shortly. Stay tuned. I just need Ken to move so I can sit in that seat. Thank you to everyone who is tuning in on Facebook. As you may hear, we have a packed house tonight here at Opportunity Resources for the Mushroom Hunting Workshop. We are letting the last few people who are arriving at the venue get settled, and the presentation will be starting shortly. Thanks for your patience.
Good evening, everybody. We have a really good program on mushrooms tonight. Before we start, I don't know if you know where you're at, but you're at Opportunity Resources, and so we serve about 700 people with adults with disabilities in Missoula. We have a staff of about 300, and I'm not going to talk much more other than if you call our main office, the last Friday of the month, we have a lunch tour with food provided by Market on Front. So that might entice you to call and get a little speech. So, Amy, are you going to lead? This is Lee.
Welcome. The Shining Mountains chapter of the Montana Wilderness Association is pleased you are here tonight to learn how to enjoy mushrooms and live to tell about it. Our chapter provides free presentations such as this. We provide free guided outdoor adventures during both the hiking and skiing season. And I invite you to join. It's fun. You meet some wonderful people, and you'll be working towards keeping Montana special. So please consider joining. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce a member of our remarkable event committee. Please welcome Amy.
Just want to say thanks for being here. It's really exciting to see this many people in this room. I just want to quickly introduce Tim Wheeler, and he is a geologist and mycologist at the university. And he's awesome. He also takes really beautiful photographs. There's a few out there. And we're really excited about him. And I just also want to say thank you so much to all the volunteers that were here helping to get all this organized, because it's been a long process. So thank you for all of that. And here's Tim.
Thanks, Amy. Can everybody hear me if I talk like this? No. This is better? Okay. Hey, thanks for coming out. This is great. Just a quick show of hands. How many are out tonight because this fall was an amazing mushroom season? How many are here because they're kind of long-term mushroom addicts? So, first, raise the hands for because it's a crazy season. Okay. Good. So basically what I'm going to do tonight with you guys is I'm going to go through kind of species by species for about 20 species of kind of our common or highly prized edible mushrooms in Montana. And additionally, I'm going to kind of take some tangents on things that might look like or things to avoid. And I was going to have kind of a question like, who's seen this mushroom? Who cooks with this mushroom? I think there's too many people, and if I open up the floor, we're not going to get past species number 2. So let's try to hold our questions, I guess, till the end. But yeah, thanks for coming out, and let's just get into it. Do you guys like the? Should we try this light out? Does everybody feel safe? That's a little better, right? All right, so I'm going to start at the beginning. So what is a mushroom? You'll see here kind of a diversity slide here showing different shapes and colors and stuff like that. A mushroom, by standard definitions, is just the fruiting body of a fungus. Just like an apple, on an apple tree is the fruit. Inside that apple are seeds. Basically, the mushroom comes up usually above the ground, to release spores, similar to seeds, but they're it's a little different. And I won't get into that biology of that right now, but know that hopefully you've thought to yourself when you're out walking and you see fungi and you pick one, hopefully like, am I hurting the ecosystem? Am I damaging this organism? Hopefully you've thought that. Good on you. Basically, there have been a bunch of different studies done using basic plots where people have gone out years after years and harvested some plots and not others. And just like you can pick apples off your apple tree every season, all the evidence points to you can go out and you pick your mushrooms repeatedly every season. As long as you don't really disturb the soil or the substrate that it's coming out of. So as long as you go in, you cut your mushroom off, that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to be up there to animals to see it, wind to spread those spores. So you're doing it a favor by picking it. But that being said, other creatures do eat mushrooms, squirrels, bears, deer, things like that. So maybe leave 1 or 2 behind. And so this slide here, basically you probably all recognize cap and stalk, right? So you have a dome-shaped cap. Underneath that usually are these gills, but as you'll see as I go through the talk, there's some other structures that pop out. And those structures release the spores, okay? And so those spores can either wash away or blow away in the wind and start new mushrooms. And so I just throw this up here. These are kind of a diversity slide of spores, and you can see basically the different structures, shapes, and colors, so not all spores are the same. And so you often, if you've gone out there and trying to learn your mushrooms, you've probably seen hundreds of, say, little brown mushrooms that look the same, or hundreds of medium-sized white mushrooms that might look the same. And yeah, in a hand specimen, they do look very similar, but when you stick them under the microscope, many of them have very unique spore shapes and colors and sizes. So really quickly about some terminology. So what is a mushroom? as I go through the talk, you might hear me say some of these things. So if we start at the base, the mycelium, think of that as the main part of the fungus. And so that is underground, either releasing enzymes or in the wood releasing enzymes. And then above that, and so think of it as like a root system. It's a little more primitive than standard roots, but above that we have a stem, or you sometimes see it called a stipe or stalk. And then there's often talk about different features on that stem. That might be important to identify. And then above that you can see we have pores on one side and gills on the other. Those are the structures that actually house the spores. And then the cap, or pileus, you'll see in some of your books. And so another important thing to remember before you go out in the woods is, if you're looking for a certain species of mushroom, you go away from the talk tonight and you're like, I really want to find a chanterelle. Well, it helps to know a little bit about the ecology of that organism, so you can kind of narrow down where you might want to go, start to look. And so there's kind of three main life strategies for mushrooms, and this is basically how they get their food, how they get their nutrition. And the first one is parasitic, so we all know what parasites are. They actually harm the organism, so a lot of shelf fungi or polypore fungi or conchs growing right on the side of a tree. Oftentimes those cause root rots or heart rots and things like that will kill the tree. The second group, and this is kind of probably what you were taught in high school, are mushrooms that are saprophytic, and these guys are the ones that release enzymes into the environment. Those enzymes break down organic material, and the fungi, the mycelium, sucks it back up. And so a lot of fungi, eat our pine needles, eat leaves, eat grass clippings, things like that. And then the final group are mycorrhizal fungi. Myco means fungus, rhizal means root. And these fungi actually have an intimate relationship with the roots of like 90% of all vascular land plants on the planet. Even mosses, grasses, pine trees, things like that. And basically the organism they're attached to is photosynthesizing and sending sugars down through the mycelium network and interacting with fungi, and the fungi are sending like phosphorus and nitrogen and other nutrients to the tree. So they're swapping nutrients. It's really cool, really important in our forests. But if you know you have a mycorrhizal mushroom, and it's only mycorrhizal with spruce, say, you're not going to find it in a lodgepole pine forest, right? So it pays to do a little research up front to know what you're dealing with. And then I'll throw this up there, and I'm kind of going to go through species that kind of fruit early in the year, and then we'll kind of end with some later species in the fall. And basically, I just put this together, list of species on the side here, some of the common ones. I won't talk about everything on that column tonight, but basically the intensity of the green is like the peak season for that. And so you can see there's kind of a bias here, right, to our season. If you're not familiar with the mushroom season, usually we have a great spring season that lasts a couple months, and then pretty warm, dry, slow period in the summer, and then pretty abundant fall. And you can see that most of our edible species are September, October. And it was shaping up this year to be probably I was seeing mushrooms out there that I haven't seen in 10 years or so. And so I was saying it's a 1 in 10 year, and it was shaping up to that. And then we got that really hard frost, and it kind of slowed things down. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but a lot of fungi around here are actually triggered by a cold snap here and there, but once you get 3 or 4 nights of teens and 20s, that's a pretty strong signal to the fungi that the season's over. And so we kind of got a little bit of a short surprise there at the end of the season. Okay, so I'm going to start with a mushroom I imagine many of you are familiar with, or mushroom group that many of you are familiar with. And these are the Morels, right? And so here I have a picture kind of our classic 4 species that we thought we had in Montana. We had the black fire morel, we had the gray natural morel, we had the black natural morel, and then we had the yellow morel, sometimes called the river morel. Recently, I'd say in the last 6 or 7 years, a lot of molecular and genetic evidence has come in, and we've started to split and rename a lot of these things. Well, we used to have 15 or so species of morel in North America. We now have close to 40. And basically each one of these, we now know we have at least 4 or 5 species of fire morel in Montana. This gray one now has its own name. It's called Myrcella is the genus. This one's called Myrcella frustrata because it frustrated mushroom nerds for years and years and years because we didn't have a name for it, but we knew it was this thing. And there's 4 or 5 species of natural black morel, and I mean natural just means it doesn't come up in a burn. You've probably all picked fire morels at some point or gone out looking for fire morels. Those only pop up the year after a fire. The other species of morels, you'll see them here and there whenever there's moisture out in the spring. The good part about this is all 40 of those species in North America are edible, and to my palate taste the same. There is quite a bit of difference in texture, and as you guys have probably discovered, texture is a big part of mushroom cuisine. So, and this was recently described a few years ago. This is the gray morel, and this is our last fire morel to fruit. So we have basically, if you go out in a fire in say March, early or late March, you might see 2 weeks of great morel harvest. That's just one species, and then you might have a week off or 2 weeks off. Then there'll be another flush. That's the second species. And so this is one of the last species, one of the latest species. You can pick this in high elevation fires into August some years. And it's my favorite morel. It's a lot of people's favorite morel because it's the thickest flesh morel, so it's a real beefy thing. A lot of morels, if you like chuck it, and hit the wall, it would fall to pieces. This thing would bounce off and bounce on the floor. They also tend to be really big, and so they make great stuffing morels for stuffing other tasty bits inside them. And this is what you hope to see at the end of the day, and that's what you hope to see in the field. So it just gets you excited there. So, who here hasn't eaten a morel? All right. Well, good luck. It's always one of my favorite, and I'll take a moment to talk about. You might have some experience of hearing about people who eat morels and have an upset stomach, or have some kind of gastrointestinal distress. And if you look across all mushroom poisonings in the country, the majority of them, more than half of them, are not a toxin or a poison that the mushroom produces. Think about it like this. If I made you got you a hamburger or a turkey sandwich, and I put it on a stump in the woods, and I came back in 3 or 4 days, would you eat that? No, right? So mushrooms do have some protein in them. There's some B vitamins. They're mostly water, but lots of other creatures out there love to live, breathe, poop, and eat these things. So I don't want to scare you away from mushrooms, but the majority of those poisonings are actually just food poisoning. So a secondary bacteria or another fungus has attacked that organism, and it was undercooked or not washed or cleaned properly. So as beginners, I highly recommend that you treat your fungi like raw meat. Now once you get a little more experience and you've eaten this thing and you know it doesn't cause any trouble with you, then you can start getting more creative. But cook them on high heat to begin with. So this is a false morel. This is a Thimber morel. And how do you tell the difference? Anybody know how to tell the difference between a false and a true morel? Yeah, so true morels have a hollow stem, so if you slice them top to bottom, they're hollow. All the false morels, when you do that, they have like a pithy or white or cottony inside. And so it's a pretty good field character. And it's something you do want to be aware because a lot of mushrooms in the Myrcella family produce what's called monomethylhydrazine, which is an ingredient in rocket fuel. It's a very volatile thing, and if you breathe enough of it, it does cause neurological damage. And so, being volatile, it cooks off real easy. So you can cook these, and you can cook off that monomethylhydrazine, but don't be over your stove like this. So I don't recommend this to beginners because of that fact. And so I'll go through a couple false morels, and they all produce monomethylhydrazine. Even morels do, but it's in very, very low quantity. So if you are cooking a giant batch of morels and you kind of feel lightheaded or dizzy, maybe take a step back. This is the common false morel. You can see it's called Gyromitra esculenta. Esculenta means delicious. This thing I wouldn't say is delicious, but it has a similar texture of morels. And if you were to slice through that, you would see a pithy interior. Here's our Snowbank false morel. And so here in Montana, we're lucky we have this really unique flora of mushrooms that fruit after melting snowbanks high in the mountains. And it's a combination of soil temperature increasing and that moisture melting down. And this is one of them. This is a giant, beefy, softball-sized mushroom. A lot of people go out looking for morels, find this thing. People have eaten this for years with no ill effect, but it does produce that monomethylhydrazine. Any questions on morels? I said I wouldn't open it to the floor, but okay. So we know this one, right? We've also read Alice in Wonderland. This is called the fly agaric. A lot of books call this a poisonous mushroom, and that's a matter of, perception, I guess. No pun intended. This is a hallucinogenic mushroom. You eat this mushroom, and you will have a intense headache for a little bit, maybe some sweating. You might go into a light coma. You might wake up and have hallucinations and visions, and then maybe a headache for a couple days. Or you can prepare it properly and avoid most of those negative effects and kind of tease apart the ones you want. I don't recommend this, but I throw this up there not because of that, but because the genus Amanita and Amanitas in general are basically 3 of our top 5 deadliest poisonous mushrooms are Amanitas. And so it pays to get to know this group. And they have some very distinct features. And this slide shows it very well. So if you can see the far picture, what looks like a little golf ball, inside that little golf ball, if we were to slice it, would be this little red mushroom. And so they call that eggshell or that covering a universal veil. So all Amanitas have universal veils. And as that mushroom expands, that veil will break, leaving little warts and patterns on the cap, right? So you can shrink that red mushroom back into a ball. It was coated in this white stuff. All Amanitas have a universal veil, okay? And there are a couple other species that do, but most of our highly prized edible mushrooms will not have that character. This is the Panther Amanita. It has many of the similar chemicals that the fly agaric did in the last slide. This is the booted Amanita. And you see that they have a really nice skirt or ring on the stalk. That's called a partial veil. And that, if you can imagine that attaching back up to the cap, and it protects those gills, those spore-bearing surfaces until they're mature and ready to be released by wind. But once they expand, once that mushroom cap expands, that skirt will drop and leave very distinctive markings and stuff on the stalk. And this is called the booted Amanita because it's got this big boot at the base. This is called the Western Grisette, and you can see that universal veil. It looks like that mushroom on the right is bursting out of an egg sac. If you see that, you know you have an Amanita. And here I dug this one out a little bit so you can see the importance of when you're learning a new mushroom, don't just go and slice it off, because there's a lot of very important characters that might be under the ground. And this is kind of an example of one. And you can see the remnants of that universal veil there. Makes like a little skirt at the base. This one is actually a delicious edible mushroom, and people eat this all the time. But because it's an Amanita, definitely don't recommend it to beginners. This is the common grisette. Okay, so next group mushrooms. This is called the white Matsutake or the pine mushroom. Has anybody eaten this mushroom? Just one? 2? You guys are lucky. Yeah. This is probably the Pacific Northwest's most highly sought edible mushroom. It's probably up there. It's probably second only to the European truffles, maybe now the Oregon truffles. And this thing can fetch a pretty price in certain situations. This guy is mycorrhizal. You usually find it with lodgepole pine, where lodgepole pine kind of transitions to spruce and fir. And then further west in Montana, you'll find it with hemlock and white pine. And this is one of the mushrooms that you will smell before you see it. And its odor is like nothing else that I've smelled on the planet, and it's often described as like red hot candies and sweaty gym locker. And that doesn't sound great, but I really like the smell, and most people seem to like the smell. And it's a really thick flesh mushroom, so it cooks up and holds its texture and flavor really well. What I like to do is, if I get a nice fresh button, I'll slice it into 3 or 4 thick slices on a piece of foil, maybe a little bit of soy sauce, and wrap that foil around that mushroom and then stick it in the freezer. And anytime I want to eat a matsutake, I just grab a foil ball, put it in the oven for a little bit, and soaks up that soy sauce, maybe put it on a cracker or toast, and it's amazing. There are quite a few mushrooms that, to the beginner, will kind of look like this, but nothing, once you smell a matsutake once, you will never forget that smell. And here's kind of what you want to see. These are what we call duff humpers. You can see that one kind of in the back pushing up the duff layer, the moss layer. And so oftentimes when you get good, you find a patch and you think it's the right week that they're going to be fruit, and you come out and you don't see any mushrooms, but you get down a little bit and you see all these little humps. And that's, if you see that, you know you're there perfectly, because there'll be nice fresh button mushrooms in there. Once they expand, the cap expands like that, their shelf life goes down really quickly. So next mushroom is the honey mushroom. This creature has a really cool story. A, because it's probably the largest organism on the planet. There is a colony of this mushroom, and it's a parasite, so foresters don't like this. It causes a heart rot and root rot. But it can be quite gigantic. There's a specimen, or an individual mycelium, that is, I think, 3 miles across, and they dated it to be 8,000 years old. And there's a couple more big ones that they just discovered in Michigan. So really cool ecology, but for years and years and years, foresters didn't like seeing this thing. And here's a cluster coming out. This is kind of what you would see out in the woods, a stump. And it's called the honey mushroom not because of the taste, but because of the color of the cap. It's supposed to be kind of honey colored. We have a few species of honey mushroom, but this is the common one, Armillaria solitipes. And I used to teach a class for a field camp over in the Swan Valley. And one year these were college-age kids that come out and get exposed to the Montana wilds. And I would teach a day course with them. And one of the kids in the class was just so excited about eating something from the woods. You know, he grew up in Vermont. He grew up in the woods, but he never approached the woods for food. And he was so excited to try a mushroom and cook it. And sure enough, we got out in the field. We were looking at mushrooms. We found a whole giant crop of honey mushrooms. And so he starts gathering some honey mushrooms. We take them back, and normally when we come back from the field, we start IDing stuff on the table and talk about mushrooms. Well, he went right to the kitchen, fried up some of these mushrooms, brought them back out to the group, and we all kind of nibbled on a few bites here and there. It was great. Everybody loved it. We learned some mushrooms. I went home. 2 a.m., I get a call from the camp director. Hey, I think we all ate a poisonous mushroom and we're all dying. And I was like, no, calm down. We're not going to die. We didn't eat a poisonous mushroom. This is what we ate. Can you put the kid on the phone who cooked the mushrooms? And she said, hold on, he's in the toilet vomiting or diarrhea or something. And he gets on, catches his breath, and I was like, hey, what did you do? How'd you cook those mushrooms up? He's like, well, I just sliced them in half, and then I fried them up. And I was like, well, how long did you fry them? He's like, I don't know, maybe a minute. And so we basically all got food poisoning. By 11 a.m. the next day, we're all fine. But do cook your mushrooms on high heat, please. So another duff humper, right? You might walk past that not recognize as a mushroom, but you dig it up, and there's your mushroom. This mushroom tastes horrible. It's bitter. It's hard. It's like chewing on bitter cardboard or something. But it's a really big mushroom, and it's really firm, and people find it, and they think they're so excited. But if this mushroom gets attacked by a secondary fungus, I just warned you about secondary fungi and how they could cause food poisoning. Well, this one gets attacked by this fungus called hypomyces, and it's a little tiny microscopic thing, and it turns this white mushroom into the lobster mushroom. And this is probably one of my favorite mushrooms to eat. And no joke, not only does it look the color of lobster, but the smell when you cook it and the texture, you can fool. If you made a lobster roll side by side, and you use the same spices, I don't think you could tell the difference. And so they did some studies on this. Basically what this is, this orange little fungus takes over this mushroom when it's still underground before it pops up, and takes over the whole structure. And so the orange is this other mushroom releasing its own spores, and it covers the gills. It doesn't even let the old mushroom reproduce. So it's a parasite, takes a boring, hard, disgusting mushroom and turns it into this delicious, beautiful thing. What else are we going to say about that? Yeah, this I don't see this every year, and it tends to like the really humid but not too cold is when you see a good crop of the lobster mushroom. And I find this in pretty much any older, moist, mossy forest in western Montana. You can find it. And this thing has, what I meant to say was that if you take a sample of this and test the DNA, there's almost no DNA left of that original mushroom. It's all this second fungus, which is really cool. And a quick side note is that this thing is full of vitamin D. I think 2 cups of this, I forget the percentage on vitamin D, but it's really high. A lot of iron, a lot of calcium. It's actually really good, a little bit of protein, and it's got a bunch of antioxidants as well. So a really cool mushroom. This is the shrimp russula. Shrimp because it smells and tastes like shrimp, which not everybody loves, especially if this mushroom gets a little overripe. It can quickly go to that fishy smell that you might not enjoy. But up until that point, it's a very good mushroom. It has a kind of a brittle flesh to it, so it kind of crumbles a little bit. Everybody's probably seen a shaggy mane or 2 in their life. On the left there, nice young, fresh buttons coming up. And then on the right, you're saying, this is the same mushroom? Yes. Probably like 3 hours difference. So this mushroom comes up, hours later, it liquefies into this goop. Why would you do that? Why would you do that as a mushroom? Right? Because you liquefy into a goop. What's that black goop? It's just full of spores. What likes the smell of liquid rotting goop? Flies. Flies come and land on that. Spores get stuck to their feet, wings, and stuff. They fly away. And it's a great way to spread your spores. However, if you ever, you hear this story all the time. People are on a bike ride, and they found all these shaggy manes alongside the trail, and they're picking them and putting them in their backpack. And they got to finish their bike ride, and they get home to a black pile of mush. And so if you pick this mushroom, you better be ready to eat it in a couple hours or less. So, but it's a little warning. There's always a little warning. All mushrooms are very good at bioaccumulating heavy metals. And this one, they've done a bunch of studies on this thing. This mushroom is great at bioaccumulating selenium, copper, and a handful of other heavy metals, and to some serious levels that this mushroom can be used to clean up toxic sites, old mine sites and stuff like that. You can put a bed of sawdust or hay down and grow this mushroom in there, and it'll suck up all those heavy metals, and you can harvest those mushrooms and get the heavy metals out of the soil. So I don't recommend eating this mushroom in certain places in Montana that have had mining impact, and or if you're maybe alongside the highway or asphalt right there, because there's lots of stuff that can leach out of asphalt. So do keep that in mind when you're out looking at this thing. All right. The king bolete, also known as the porcini. And what do you notice about this mushroom? It's a little different than most of what we looked at. Instead of having gills, like little blades underneath the cap where the spores are, this is like a giant sponge underneath. And the sponge, if you look closely, are just these tiny little holes, and inside those holes are where the spores drop out. And this mushroom, so not all mushrooms you will prepare them the same way or preserve them the same way. This mushroom dries really well. Morels dry very well too. You can dry a morel, get it crispy, crunchy dry, and put it in a jar or Ziploc, and it's good for 10 plus years. And when you rehydrate it, it kind of rehydrates fairly similar to the texture that it was when it was fresh. And this mushroom kind of does as well. And it has a very, very strong nutty flavor. And they're giant. Like that big one is probably the size of a soccer ball. And so you can find 1, 2, and 3 pound boletes. Here they are, a little bit younger, little buttons. And the key feature for knowing you have a bolete, a true bolete, this is the spring king now. If you look closely at its stem or stalk, you'll see a kind of, they call it a reticulate pattern. It's just a net-like pattern. It looks like someone imprinted a net onto it. And it's very fine, and it can wash off and stretch out. But if you see that, you know you have a true bolete. And boletes are great because there are no deadly boletes. So there are some that will cause gastrointestinal upset, but they're pretty easy to identify, so do a little bit of homework. But if you do find a bolete or a sponge layer on this, chances are it's a good group of mushrooms to play around for food as beginners. So the next group and related are the slippery jacks. So you can see that spore surface again. It's got a great common name, right? Slippery jack, because it looks like a flapjack and it's slimy usually on the top. I think the slippery jacks have a great flavor, but I have never been able to get over the texture. So there are ways to kind of help that. Think about this. If you cook up that sponge layer and some butter, it's just going to suck up all that butter, get real oily, real slimy. The cap oftentimes gets slimy as you cook it or add water to it. So people will peel the cap, which actually comes off fairly easy, and then take your thumb and you can grind out that pore layer. And you can save those pores and dry them, and you can powder them, and literally a teaspoon or two in a pot of soup is enough to thicken that soup right up. And then you can save the white bits and eat those like you would any other mushroom. This is the hollow-footed slippery jack. So doesn't look slippery, and it's not. It's one of the dry slippery jacks, but it's really easy to identify. You slice it up, and it's got this hollow foot or hollow stem, and you can see that membrane there, that partial veil, still protecting the young pores. So this was a immature specimen. And these, the slippery jacks are mycorrhizal, so they're often mycorrhizal with Douglas fir and pine. So they do really well in like young lodgepole pine forests and mixed pine Doug fir forests. This is Swillus gravelii, and you pretty much see these slippery jacks out anytime there's moisture. They're very common. Basically, if the trees are happy, your mycorrhizal partner will be happy. So if there's a lot of moisture around, usually there'll be abundance of fruiting and happy trees. It's called the Tamarack Jack. Same thing, same kind of cooking. It's maybe less slimy than the majority of your slippery jacks, but very common. And the key feature for this is it has this yellow ring around the margin of the cap. And you can see it really well in this photo. And you can also see how slimy these things can get. This is called the Western Painted Jack. It looks like someone painted brush strokes on the cap. And I don't know if you can kind of see in that mushroom in the corner that I sliced open, there's a little bit of yellow-green, blue-green color coming through. A lot of times, a good identifying feature for many mushrooms is how does the flesh change color if you slice it or bruise it. And this one turns a pretty greenish blue pretty quickly on young specimens. They're all delicious. What you want to find are these tiny little young buttons before the cap really starts to expand. All right, so who has eaten a chanterelle? A little more. Okay, good. This, up until recently, we only really had one yellow chanterelle in Montana. We now know we have at least 3 species of yellow or golden chanterelle. We have this one that was recently described in the Cascade Mountains that is fairly common in the Cabinet Mountains here. I haven't seen it anywhere outside of like the Cabinet far northwest part of Montana, which isn't surprising if it's truly a coastal thing. It's our beefiest chanterelle. One of those individuals is probably a softball size, and there's a lot of yummy flesh. I would never dry a chanterelle. You dry chanterelles, they kind of don't ever rehydrate, and you're stuck with little pieces of cardboard. So most people freeze them or can them, and so you can do a quick flash cook and freeze the bites, and then just add those to your meals as you go forward. I think it has a great texture. It has a very meaty texture. It holds up to cooking. It holds up to a lot of high heat. It's a yummy mushroom. They can be a little bit of a headache to clean sometimes because they can get kind of funnel shaped and funnel dirt and stuff and get you irregular. Here's another picture of the Cascade Chanterelle. The other species is we have the rainbow chanterelle here as well. And this is the most common yellow or golden chanterelle we have. And if you can kind of see, it has this whitish bloom, or almost a pinkish white bloom to the cap. That's kind of its field character. It's a small chanterelle, very dense small chanterelle, very common in the Bitterroot Mountains, common up near Glacier, places like that. Here it is a little older, a little more mature. And the key character for chanterelles is you can see they kind of have gills there. Those gills or ridges run all the way down almost to the ground. So most of the other mushrooms we looked at, those gills are just up in the cap. They don't come all the way down the stem like that. Here's one more shot of some young rainbow chanterelles. The white chanterelle. So I feel like, I don't know, this mushroom's pretty common. I feel like you find it equally as much as you do the golden chanterelles. And I can't really tell, I don't get a flavor or a texture difference. And these will, after you pick them, kind of turn yellow. So if you brought kind of a day-old specimens, they can kind of look like golden chanterelles. But they're never as brilliant yellow or gold as a true golden chanterelle. Our blue chanterelle. Has anybody seen this? Just one. Yeah, I've seen this probably. I probably know of less than 10 localities of this thing in Montana. And it fruits once every 5, once every 8, once every 10 years. So it's, from the data we have, it's a fairly rare thing. It used to be called one species. Recent genetics have now found 4 blue chanterelles in North America. We have 2 of them. Almost impossible to tell the difference in the field. It's all microscopic characters. But this mushroom grows in clusters. Those other chanterelles are all kind of single entities, whereas this is kind of a cluster, and they get darker. They start out really blue when they're young, maybe even purple, and they fade to black as they age. And so you may have walked by this mushroom just thinking it was a pile of bear shit. Because it really, from 10 feet away, it fools me nine times out of 10. But it's a delicious mushroom. It has a kind of a pliant, rubbery or texture to it, so it's got a bit of a snap, maybe. That's one way to think about it. Here's another nice cluster. And you can see those gills or ridges kind of run all the way down the base of the mushroom. So keep your eye out for the blue chanterelle. It is unrelated to all the other chanterelles, genetically. What does this look like? What'd you say? Brains? I see more icicles. Little tiny icicles. And this is called the icicle fungus. This is the Conifer Icicle. We have 4 species of icicle. Some of them can be 50-pound clusters. They all grow on trees. We have 3 species that grow on cottonwood, and 1 that grows on conifers. They're all delicious. They all taste and smell great. They also can be hard to clean. They can get needles and dirt in there, but they're usually off the ground on standing dead or logs on dead logs. And what my wife and I like to do is we just take this thing and crumble it on top of a pizza, maybe put a little more cheese on it and bake it. It's a very, very delicate, very lovely mushroom. And there's a cluster of it. And so you can pop that whole thing right off the tree. Here's another cluster. This is those last 3 photos with the Conifer Icicle. And then this is one of the cottonwood ones. You kind of, a little bit of a different branching pattern, but they look very similar. They're all delicious. And you can't really confuse this mushroom for anything else around here. This one has a great name. It's called the Hedgehog. And this is another mushroom that has a very distinct smell, and it smells like brown sugar. And when you cook it up, it has a very sweet flavor as well. And it looks normal, it just looks from above, it looks like a normal cap and stalk mushroom. But when you flip it over, you can see it doesn't have gills, it doesn't have pores. It's got little teeth or little spines. And we can zoom in on those spines. And the stem is over here. And basically, if you were to look at an individual spine, it would just be covered with spores all around it. And so this mushroom is basically an early fall. If we're having a great fall, it's one of the earlier mushrooms to fruit in the fall. It doesn't seem to like cold very much. It's called the sulfur shelf, or chicken of the woods. And this is another mushroom that can be gigantic. I've seen that cluster there, that stump is probably 3 foot diameter, 4 foot diameter stump. And that cluster probably weighed 30 or 40 pounds. And most of that individual is a little too old maybe. What you want to see is more brilliant yellow, more brilliant gold, less browns. But you can go around there and just cut off any of the parts that look old and cut out the nice fleshy pieces, or you can kind of keep looking for a fresher, maybe a younger specimen like that. There are 3 or 4 species in North America. We only have 1 here. And you can see this mushroom from 50 yards away sometimes in the forest. It can be quite big and quite brilliant. It tends to have in my book, it's a little bit of a sour taste. Some people love this, it takes high heat very well. It's got a lot of moisture in it, so you got to cook it very long. But it's a yummy mushroom and pretty common. This is our yellow coral. We have about 10 or 12 species of yellow coral in Montana. What we like to do with this one is, especially the ones that have the big white base like this, is get some fairly thick slices and grill them up. And they kind of remind me of kind of eggplant, grilled eggplant maybe. We have probably 40 species of coral mushroom. We have green corals, blue corals, red corals, pink corals, every color basically. And these guys are mycorrhizal. They call this the club coral or the candy club. This is another brown sugar. And this is one that it's pretty easy to identify. And they can be pretty big, like that big one in there's, longer than my finger. And the problem is though, there's a bunch of insects that love this thing. And so you come up, you see these beautiful mushrooms, you grab them and they just crumble because they've been eaten out from the inside. So they're hollow. And so you got to be quick to get this one fresh and yummy. But when you do, it's got a great texture and that great sweet flavor. Here's another group of them. Very distinct flat top. This is called Clavaria delphis truncata because the top is truncated. Has anybody seen this mushroom? You've been out in the woods a while. So this is a parasite. This is a root, it causes a root rot. And so you'll find it just around the base of conifers, maybe a few feet out from the trunk, living and consuming the roots in the root system. Very rare mushroom, maybe even more rare than the blue chanterelle. And this cluster was probably the size of a soccer ball or maybe even a basketball. And it's got that egg noodle kind of texture. Also can be kind of hard to clean, but it's got a very, very nice flavor. I've only eaten it once here in Montana. I've seen it a handful of times, and now I just leave it behind because it is so uncommon, even though it is a parasite. Kind of let it do its thing. Or you can come up and just cut a little chunk off it. Don't take the whole organism.
What's the common name?
The cauliflower mushroom. Yeah. Looks more like a pile of noodles to me than cauliflower, but who's eaten this mushroom? Okay, you guys are all lying. You've all probably had this mushroom. Have you ever had sweet and sour soup or some other Asian soups? Little black stringy things in there? That's this mushroom. They have a little bit of a crunch to them, a little bit of a pop. It's called the wood ear. And it's unique in the fungal world because it's one of our jelly fungi. So most other fungi have, they're more membranous or fleshy. And this thing kind of has jiggles like jelly. And they make these little ear-shaped clusters. And you can find, they're usually on down spruce or grand fir logs. And you can find hundreds of these on one log. And so you can fill up your whole basket. I don't know if you'd ever be able to eat that many, but super abundant, super common. It's one of those black stringy things in your Asian soups, sweet and sour soups. Okay, back to this chart again. So I didn't talk about a couple. You might be asking yourself, well, you didn't talk about puffballs. You didn't talk about oyster mushrooms. You didn't talk about the shaggy parasol. I had to whittle it down to keep this talk 50 minutes. So I didn't talk about those, and those are really common mushrooms that I think many of you probably have some experience with. So I tried to show you some things that were different and new. Do take a picture of this if you haven't, if you want to, or you can send me an email. I can send you this spreadsheet. So a quick if we take a step back, so how many species of fungi do we have in Montana? You might be thinking to yourself, this is overwhelming. There's so many things out there. I'm never going to feel safe from what I eat. We just came out with a proto checklist of all the fungi in North America known based on herbarium records. And the number they came up with was 45,000 species in North America. Only 10,000 of those are what we call macrofungi. So these are big things. The other 35,000 are tiny microscopic things that most of us would never come across. So there's about 10,000 mushrooms. Of those 10,000 mushrooms, there's only about 50 or 60 that would be considered highly prized edibles. And there's only about 30 or 40 that we consider or that are deadly poisonous. And so to kind of ease your mind, if you can learn less than 100 species, that's still a lot, but you can feel pretty safe. And not all those actually grow in Montana, so that number is much smaller if you bring it in. But so how many species do we have in Montana? So the conservative estimate is there's one, for every species of vascular plant, there's 6 species of fungi. And so if we have 2,500 species of vascular plant, does that mean we have 15,000 species of fungi in the state? I'm going to say probably. I'm working on a mushroom checklist with the Heritage Program right now for the state, and we only have like 16 or 1,700 species on our checklist. So we got a lot of work to do. But hopefully that kind of gives you a sense of the scale we're dealing with here. And then I throw this up there just because it's one of my passions, is going out there and discovering new things. And the fungal world is just full of new things. And so I want you to look at the dotted line here. And you have number of new species described each year over the last 10 years. This is globally. And so 2016, 2,500 new species of fungi were described to science in that year. So we're averaging about 2,000 new species of fungi every year. So lots of work to be done. Thanks for coming out. That's all I have for you tonight. Please, it's pretty easy to take a picture of a mushroom and send an email. I get mushroom pictures in my email box every day. If you do have a really cool mushroom, send it along if you don't know what it is, because it's a great way for me. I don't have to go out and search around. I know exactly when my bolete patch is fruiting because you sent me a picture of a bolete. And then I do have a bunch of my photos up on my website. Do check that out. It's listed by species, so kind of if you're looking at a mushroom in a book and you think you have this thing, you can go to my website and look that species up and kind of see some pictures from Montana of what that might look like. Thanks, everybody.